Have you ever met someone who was utterly convinced of their own brilliance, yet to everyone else their ideas were shallow, their logic flawed, and their confidence completely unearned? We've all encountered them, the co-worker who dominates meetings with nonsense, the politician who speaks with unwavering certainty on topics they barely understand, or the social media guru dispensing advice that crumbles under the slightest scrutiny. Think of the emperors of old who believed themselves gods while their empires collapsed around them, or modern-day leaders who double down on failed policies, blind to their own incompetence. This isn't just random foolishness, it's a pattern so consistent, so predictable, that it demands an explanation. And one of history's sharpest minds, Niccolò Machiavelli, saw it coming centuries ago. He understood the mechanisms that allow the least capable to believe they're the most qualified, and worse, how they often rise to power precisely because of that delusion. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this psychological phenomenon, one that shapes boardrooms, governments, and even our everyday interactions. But this isn't just about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing the traps that lead people, maybe even you, into the same cycle of self-deception. Because the terrifying truth is this: the more convinced someone is of their own intelligence, the less likely they are to question it. And in a world that rewards confidence over competence, that's a recipe for disaster. Imagine two people. One spends years studying a subject, wrestling with complexities, admitting gaps in their understanding. The other skims a few articles, absorbs surface-level ideas, and declares themselves an expert. Who do you think walks away more confident? Counterintuitively, it's the second one. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect in action, the cognitive bias where the less someone knows, the more they overestimate their understanding. It's why the amateur argues louder than the scholar, why the rookie dismisses the veteran's advice, and why bad ideas often spread faster than good ones. The incompetent lack the very tools needed to recognize their incompetence. Machiavelli saw this play out in politics. He watched rulers who believed their own propaganda, who mistook flattery for truth, and who surrounded themselves with yes-men until reality came crashing down. The smarter someone truly is, the more they doubt. The fool, however, never hesitates. But here's where it gets dangerous. Society often mistakes certainty for expertise. We promote the loudest voice in the room, not the most informed. We reward those who speak boldly, even if they're wrong, while the truly knowledgeable pause, weigh evidence, and admit uncertainty. And in that gap, the delusional rise. Why do people cling to false beliefs, even when faced with overwhelming evidence? Because admitting error isn't just about facts, it's about identity. The moment someone ties their self-worth to being smart, any challenge to their intelligence becomes a threat. Machiavelli wrote extensively about perception. He knew that power wasn't just about what was true, it was about what people believed. And if you could convince others and yourself that you were brilliant, it didn't matter if you actually were. The illusion was enough. This is why stupid people so often think they're smart. They've never been forced to confront their limitations. They've built an entire persona on being right, so they filter out contradictions. They dismiss critics as jealous, ignore failures as flukes, and reinterpret reality to fit their narrative. And the scariest part, the more power they gain, the harder it becomes to correct them. Underlings feed their ego, systems bend to their will, and soon their delusion becomes the standard. History is littered with leaders who led their nations to ruin because no one dared tell them the truth. Machiavelli didn't just diagnose the problem, he exploited it. He understood that appearing smart was often more useful than being smart. If you could manipulate perceptions, you could control outcomes. Think of the con artist who dazzles with big words but says nothing. The politician who speaks in vague, grandiose terms, letting listeners project their own meaning onto empty phrases. The corporate leader who rebrands incompetence as innovation. These are all Machiavellian tactics, using confidence as a weapon. But here's the twist. The people who do this best often start believing their own act. They're not just fooling others, they're fooling themselves. And that's when they become truly dangerous, because once you're convinced of your own infallibility, you stop learning, you stop adapting, and sooner or later, reality catches up. Stupid people don't learn from mistakes, they rationalize them. Every failure is someone else's fault, every criticism is jealousy, every setback is bad luck. But the truly intelligent dissect their failures. They ask, what did I miss? What can I do better? They don't protect their ego, they prioritize growth. Machiavelli studied fallen rulers not to mock them, but to avoid their fate. The moment you stop blaming others for your mistakes is the moment you start getting smarter. The most dangerous delusion is not ignorance. It's the unshakable conviction that one already knows everything worth knowing. This is the silent epidemic rotting away at the foundations of our institutions, our relationships, and our collective intelligence. The modern world has become a hall of mirrors where confidence reflects back on itself in an endless loop of self-affirmation, where the appearance of knowledge has replaced actual understanding, where the loudest voices dominate, not because they're right, but because they never hesitate. Machiavelli saw this coming 5 centuries ago when he observed how easily rulers could be seduced by their own propaganda, how the most mediocre minds often rose to power precisely because they lacked the capacity to doubt themselves. What he couldn't have predicted was how perfectly our current systems would amplify this phenomenon, creating entire ecosystems that reward performative intelligence over actual wisdom. The path forward isn't about accumulating more facts or sharper arguments. It's about dismantling the psychological barriers that prevent us from seeing reality clearly in the first place. Consider how we construct our sense of self in the digital age, through curated personas, through metrics of validation, through the dopamine hits of social approval. We've outsourced the measurement of our intelligence to algorithms designed to flatter rather than challenge us. The result is a generation of people who've never experienced the humbling crucible of genuine intellectual friction, who mistake the echo chamber's reverberations for the sound of their own brilliance. This isn't just about individual failings, it's about structural incentives that make self-deception the rational choice. When promotions go to those who speak with unwavering certainty rather than those who pause to consider complexity, when media elevates simplistic narratives over nuanced truth, when education systems prioritize test scores over critical thinking, we create conditions where the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just occasionally appear, but becomes the dominant mode of operation. The frightening implication is that what we call stupidity in this context isn't a lack of cognitive ability, but an entire worldview built on avoiding the discomfort of genuine self-reflection. The way out begins with recognizing how deeply our fear of being wrong shapes our behavior. Watch what happens when someone's core belief is challenged, the physiological reactions, the emotional defenses, the cognitive distortions that immediately activate to protect the ego. These aren't signs of stupidity, but of a psychological immune system working exactly as designed to preserve our self-concept. The problem arises when this system becomes too effective, when it filters out all information that might threaten our carefully constructed identity as a smart person. We see this in the executive who dismisses market data contradicting their strategy, in the scientist who ignores evidence undermining their theory, in the everyday person who doubles down on political beliefs despite overwhelming counter-arguments. What looks like stubbornness is actually a sophisticated self-preservation mechanism, one that actively prevents learning and growth. Breaking this pattern requires more than good intentions. It demands systematic rewiring of how we process information and construct our identities. Real intellectual growth happens in the discomfort zone, that liminal space where our existing mental models prove inadequate and we're forced to rebuild them. The reason so many people avoid this space isn't laziness, but because our brains interpret cognitive dissonance as genuine threat. Neuroimaging studies show that when deeply held beliefs are challenged, the brain activates the same regions that respond to physical danger. This explains why political debates turn violent, why family dinners erupt over ideological differences, why colleagues become enemies during strategy meetings. We're not just arguing about ideas, we're fighting for psychological survival. Understanding this biological basis changes everything. It means the solution isn't simply be more open-minded, but developing specific practices to lower these defensive reactions. Techniques like perspective taking,